What's up guys, you're watching Li-Fi TCG. Got a deck video for you today on Magic the Gathering Pauper Tron. So there's just recently been an announcement for a paper tournament for Pauper in my city coming up next month. So I want to try and play in that. So that's a good opportunity for me to both dust off these cards in paper and also boot up some testing of Magic Online to try and figure out what I'm going to play. Tron has always been the deck that I've had the most success with in Pauper and paper, so I thought it was a good idea to go back and see what list I would use if that's what I was going to plan on playing. I'm not going to go over like every little detail about how the deck plays, like it's a very established thing at this point, so I'm not going to explain like every single card choice that you've already seen tons of times before, but the more unique things I will spend a bit of time talking about in this video. So the last time I played Tron in paper was the version that I designed with Cleansing Wildfire. So you play the indestructible artifact lands to use Cleansing Wildfire on them, and then you use that as like mana fixing plus ramp, which is really good in your like late game big mana deck. The problem with that approach now is that Lorien Revealed exists, that's been printed in the Lord of the Rings set. This card is really strong. It's seen play in every format where it's legal. Modern, Legacy, even Vintage people play this card. And it doesn't really work in the build with Cleansing Wildfire. So first of all, why it's so good in this deck: it lets you turn colorless mana into blue mana by island cycling, and then late game, once you have a ton of mana from your Urza lands, this is a very castable draw 3, which is really good. It's also excellent with Mnemonic Wall, because if you cycle it early on, you can get it back later. Really strong card overall for this archetype. It just doesn't work with the Cleansing Wildfire, because to fit enough islands in your list, to get with Lorien Revealed and also have enough bridges for Cleansing Wildfire to work. If you had all those lands in your deck, your land count would be really high and you would be flooding a lot. So that's not really viable. And then your early game would also be really bad, because you would have a lot of lands coming into play tapped early to play your Wildfire hopefully, but also if you're like spending mana to island cycle this to get enough lands, that plus your lands coming into play tap would slow you down way too much. I think you would just have like a very clunky early game and get run over too easily. So yeah, Cleansing Wildfire version, I'm totally off that now. I think I'm just going to go back to this sort of like stock mana base that most people are playing with the Lorien Revealed. I think it's really strong and probably the correct way to build the deck going forward. So just touching on the mana base, you have the 12 Tron lands, only 2 islands, I think that's enough, plus the 2 jewel lands to get with your Lorien Revealed. Like if you ever run out of islands to search with Lorien Revealed, and then you're at the point in the game where you can just cast the Lorien Revealed anyway, so that's not going to be a problem. Technically in like an open decklist context, you could want this to be the non-snow ones from Dominaria United or whatever that set's called, just because of Thermocast and Icequake, but that's extremely marginal, and you can argue that if you play Volatile Fjord on turn 1, your opponent's going to think you're playing like Scred, so yeah, it doesn't really matter either way. This is a new land, also new since the last time I played this deck, I think. You always have to play 1 copy of this effect because you want to be able to get untapped rainbow mana from your crop rotation and your expedition map. Previously you had to play Cave of Temptation, which instead of scrying, it lets you put +1 counters on your creature by sacrificing it. In a lot of games that was an effect that you never used, so having a random ETB scry is like a nice little upgrade. And then you can also flicker it too, to scry some more. It's a nice option. Bojuka Bog is pretty stock. The dig site is still unique to me, basically. Other people don't seem to be playing this card. I still think it's really strong. Some people suggest, or they have played Quandrix Campus instead of this, which is the green-blue Scryland from Strixhaven. So the reason why I like Dig Site better, Surveil is like slightly better than Scrying, you can argue, because you can make use of your graveyard, but and also it's nice that it costs 3 mana to activate rather than 4. But the main reason why I like Dig Site better than Quandrix Campus is because it comes into play untapped. In a situation where you're searching for this with like map or crop rotation, it's because you really want to like dig through your deck as best you can to find like answers to something, or like card draw so you can pull ahead in the game. So when you're trying to maximize the amount of scry activations, basically having this come into play tap matters a lot, because if it comes into play tap versus untap, you're like missing one scry basically. So that's why I like Dig Site. The last land that I would consider like the flex slot is Remote Isle. Basically it's just like a blue source that you can also get with map to cycle it. In a situation where you don't need extra mana or any other effect, it just lets you turn your Expedition map into a draw card. So it has a lot of sort of overlap in terms of like digging through your deck for new cards with the Dig Site as well, which is why I say Remote Isle is the flex slot. Like if you had to pick only one of those to have in your list, I think the Dig Site is a bit better. But I really don't know what else to cut Remote Isle for. Like you could just cut it for another island if you want more consistent untapped mana. Like that probably wouldn't be that bad, but overall I've appreciated having access to the Remote Isle, and I don't think you get burned too much by having one more land that comes into play tap. So that's why I have that in the Manabase. But yeah, Remote Isle is like the flex land, I think. If you wanted to play a different land, that would be the one that I would swap. So I've already like pre-sorted this into columns of effects that have kind of similar roles. So here you have all the mana fixing stuff. I've already talked about how you take advantage of Lorien Revealed and all these other cards that have been played in the deck for ages. They don't really need any explaining. Next column we just have the card draw, like cantrip stuff. I mean, as usual, all these cards have been played in the deck forever. They don't need much explaining. But yeah, as I said, feel free to ask about anything in the comments if you're not sure like why the deck plays Impulse or anything like that. Don't worry about it, just ask away. Next column is the like Flicker recursion package. So these are all stock, 3 wall, the Pulse, 1 Ghostly Flicker, 1 Ephemerate. Some lists now are playing 2 Ghostly Flickers, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. This column we have the like interaction stuff. This is where things get a bit interesting to talk about. 1 Weather the Storm is absolutely stock. I would always play 1, and that's pretty standard at this point. 3 Fog effects, so 1 Tangle, 2 Moments Peace. Some people play, I mean, I'm basically the only person I think that plays the Tangle. Usually people just play all Moments Peace, but I like having the 1 Tangle just as an option. It's way better choice to recur it with Mnemonic Wall compared to Moments Peace. But yeah, if you don't agree, whatever, it's pretty slim margins either way. Some people play 4 total fog effects. I'm not sure if I just said that or not. So they played 4 Moments Peace here. I think that's a bit overkill. I haven't felt that the metagame is at a point where that's something you really need. But it's something to consider. The Breath Weapon is like a very highly polarizing card. In some matchups it just doesn't really do anything. But being able to kill like multiple Delver of Secrets, or like if anybody's still playing spell starter decks, or against red, having access to it is really important too now, especially because with the Swift Spear ban, they don't have like a prowess guy that can grow out of range of this, so it's guaranteed to kill all of the like Goblin Tomb Raider, the Cold Oath of Rebirth tokens, the Voldaren Epicure, they all die to this. Which is nice, because you against red you don't want to be in a position where you're having to like Moments Peace every turn from a really early point in the game. You'll probably get stuck and just die if you have to do that, so having a way to just clear the board is really nice. But there are other matchups where this card just doesn't really kill anything, so yeah, it's extremely polarizing. I think it's probably correct to play it main deck, but if you if you told me that like you think the metagame is at a point where you'd rather play it in the sideboard, like I wouldn't strongly argue against it, I don't think. Then the last 5 cards here, they're all counterspells. This is a lot more counterspells that I've played in the past. Like previous versions of Tron, I played with only like 2 counterspells in the main deck. But I think the reason why I like having a lot more of these counterspells now is because of having Lorien Revealed in the deck. Before, instead of playing all these counterspells, you might play some cards like Compulsive Research or Seagate Oracle or stuff like that. But you really don't need to have so many of those like value cards in the list when you have this big draw 3 effect for value that you can pretty reliably find at any point in the game just by drawing into it or like getting it back with Mnemonic Wall, things like that. So you don't need any more like divination style value cards. You'd just rather like trade better, like actually interact with your opponent, and then later you can refill with your Lorien Revealed. So yeah, that's why I'm playing 5 counterspells now, and this has felt pretty good. Having like a mix of 5 different ones probably looks really weird. So Prohibit is probably like the best one. Having a hard counter that only costs 1 blue and 1 generic is really good. There are a few things that it doesn't hit, most notably like big expensive initiative creatures like the Avenging Hunter. That's why you want to play another counter that counters any creature like unquestionably. I think the value from the card draw on Exclude is better than playing like Essence Scatter or Remove Soul as like the more efficient version that doesn't draw you a card. I think Exclude is better than those, but if you want to have a better matchup versus aggro decks or things like that, you could play Remove Soul instead of Exclude. But you want some card that counters creatures because the initiative stuff is pretty good versus you. Then Unwind is like opposite of Exclude, right? Only counters non-creature spell. This is pretty good just for generating extra mana, like when you're untapping 3 lands and your lands tap for 3 mana each. There's a nice burst of mana, you can use that to follow it up by Flashback Teachings or something. You can even untap your dig site for another Surveil, so it's pretty nice. But the other thing about Unwind is it lets you do an infinite combo, which is pretty relevant, especially in paper when you have to win matches under the clock. So I'll talk about that combo in case you're not familiar with it when I get to these 2 cards here. But yeah, so the Unwind is in the deck not only just as like a negate, but as a like combo engine thing as well. So that's those 3, and then the last ones we have Memory Lapse and Condescend. So Memory Lapse is similar to Prohibit, it's just a hard counter anything for 2 mana. The drawback is that like your opponent's immediately going to redraw the thing that you just countered, which is usually not what you want, right? Otherwise, why would you have countered it? So in like games where you're not really in that much control of the game, Memory Lapse can be a bit of a liability compared to other counterspells that would put the thing that you countered in the graveyard. But it is nice that it only costs 2 mana and counters anything. And then Condescend, also nice that it counters any type of spell like creature or non-creature, and it gives you the scry, which can be useful as well. I mean, the problem with Condescend is it gets worse when your opponent has lots of mana available. So usually when you're playing Tron, the idea is that you're going to have more mana than them most of the time, so you are not too unhappy by like overpaying into your Condescend, but definitely can be annoying in some spots versus other counterspells. So that's the thing when you play these kind of different cards that have like different pros and cons in different situations. Usually when you build a deck and you have that kind of problem or that kind of like unsolved question, a good way to resolve it is to think like trying not to double up on cards that have similar weaknesses. Like if you draw like one Exclude, say, versus an opponent that's not really threatening you with creature spells, then like that's kind of awkward. You have like one dead card. But like if you top deck another Exclude in that same spot, then like that's a much worse situation. Like being down one artificially or like virtually dead card versus two. So you don't want to double up on multiple cards that have the same weaknesses, because it greatly increases the risk that you will draw hands that brick. So that's sort of the explanation why you have this like eclectic mix of different options. Like this only works versus non-creatures, this only works versus creatures, this only works versus cheap spells, this works versus anything, but like can be awkward in some situations where like your opponent's going to redraw the thing again. And then like this works versus everything, but only if you have the like mana advantage to go with it. Whereas if you like doubled up on any of these, like if you had two Prohibits instead of like Prohibit Condescend, then like Prohibit's much worse versus initiative stuff, whereas Condescend, like you would rather have Exclude versus Avenging Hunter, but like Condescend is going to be way better versus that than Prohibit would be. Like this is the kind of consideration and like all the factors that go into it. Yeah, and I've been pretty happy with this mix. I think Condescend is like the most flexible slot in the deck. But I have been overall like pretty satisfied with it. As I said, like I think having lots of counter spells is more correct now than it has been in the past. And then I can't think of another card that like fits nicely within the web of like all those different drawbacks that I mentioned. Like there's no card I can think of that fits in better than Condescend, but feel free to suggest one if you have any different ideas about that. And then the last two cards are kind of like the win conditions. So Dinrova Horror. Not all Tron decks in the past have played Dinrova Horror. Sometimes this has been like a bit of a personal preference thing. The reason why I like Dinrova Horror is just that when your win condition is flicker, like I like having a thing in the deck that acts as a flicker target where every time you flicker it, you're like meaningfully getting ahead in the game. So Mulldrifter doesn't necessarily do that, right? Like when you flicker it, you are getting ahead because you're drawing two cards, but like that doesn't necessarily translate to actually winning. Like if you're behind on the board, or like the cards you draw don't interact, or things like that, like it's not necessarily a win condition. But whereas with a card like Dinrova Horror, like every time it hits something, your opponent is going down on cards and they're also losing board presence. So I think it's a really good thing to have to like play towards that kind of late game with the flicker. I think a card like Rolling Thunder is much more clunky than that. So yeah, one Dinrova Horror, but that's pretty stock at this point. But this other card, Meteorite, I mean I have done a video including this card in the past, but then I sort of put it to the side and now I've brought it back. So basically what I want some card in my deck that wins the game instantly when I do the Unwind combo. So now I have to talk about that Unwind combo. So in case you haven't seen it or you forgot, this is like a 9-card combo. You need 3 Urza's Towers, 1 Energy Refractor, 2 Mnemonic Walls, the Ghostly Flicker, Weather the Storm, and Unwind. So what you do is you cast Weather the Storm and you make a bunch of Storm copies, then you unwind one of the copies, untap 3 lands, untap 3 Urza's Towers, use that mana through your Energy Refractor to make blue, and then play Ghostly Flicker, getting back Ghostly Flicker targeting 2 Mnemonic Walls, getting back that Unwind and the Flicker again. Now you did all of that with the Weather the Storm still on the stack, so now unwind another one of your Weather the Storm copies, and you just keep doing this over and over, and it generates mana. So at the end, you use your flicker on your 2 Mnemonic Walls to get the Weather the Storm back. Then you cast it again, now with even more storm count, and you keep unwinding it. So what this does is it gives you infinite mana of any color, because you can filter it through the Energy Refractor. And at the end, you can just let your Weather the Storm resolve if you want, and you gain infinite life as well. And then what you do is you can use your Ghostly Flicker with Mnemonic Wall and Energy Refractor and just draw your whole deck. So coming back to Meteorite now, like once you've done that thing with Unwind the combo and you've drawn your whole deck, like I want to have some card in my list that actually just wins the game. So either that means either by dealing burn damage, like what Meteorite does, or a card that would like mill your opponent out. So you win the game when you pass the turn, basically. Because if you don't have that and you do the Unwind combo, basically all you can do is you can infinite Dinrova Horror their board away, so they have like no more cards left. But then you still have to like pass the turn a few times and attack. And like depending on the situation in paper, if your opponent doesn't concede and maybe they've gained life, or they're just like not respecting your board or whatever, then they're not going to concede, and then it's just a time waste. So you want to be able to like do the Unwind combo and then shortcut and then just draw your whole deck and then play something that directly kills them without necessarily needing combat. So first of all, the mill option, right? The compulsive research is the one card that I talked about as a card that would win in that spot after you did over all their permanents, because you could just compulsive research them until they deck. But you don't want to play compulsive research, which I think I already touched on, because your deck doesn't need any more of those like clunky value cards once you have the Lorien Revealed available. Because when you didn't have Lorien Revealed, compulsive research was like a 5th Mulldrifter, which was like, okay, yeah, maybe I could make use of that extra divination option, and it will be good value in some different spots. But like now, the compulsive research is like the 8th Mulldrifter, right? Because you already have the Mulldrifter and the Lorien Revealed as well. So like having the compulsive research just as like a random value card in the games where you're not combo killing with it is much less useful than it was in the past. So if we ignore that aspect of it and we think, well, okay, so we probably don't want to play a card that wins by decking, like some card draw spell that can target the opponent, that means we're going to be winning by damage. And in this situation, we're going to have infinite mana and infinite flickers. So any burn spell would do the job here. So like not only Rolling Thunder, but also like Lightning Bolt as well. And I think both of those cards are defensible choices instead of Meteorite. But I really, really highly value the ability of Meteorite just to be a mana rock, even though it's like a really expensive one. The way the deck is built at the moment, you're often operating only on like one colored land, and then every other time you cast a like colored spell, you have to use the Refractor, so you're losing a lot of efficiency from your Tron mana base. Just having like a monolith in play actually matters a lot. And then once you get into like mid-game situations where you don't have the infinite combo, but you have like Wall, Flicker, Meteorite, like every 2 mana you have at that point converts into 2 damage, because your Meteorite comes back untapped, so that gives you the blue source to play Ghostly Flicker. And that either can like ping down your opponent's life total over a few turns, or you can just slowly clean up their board. You can like, this is colorless, so you can shoot down Guardian of the Guild Pact with it in response to like Basilisk Gate activations even. Like you just flicker it twice and it kills Guardian. So yeah, so Meteorite is like the only card I can think of that lines up like this, where it's kind of like a removal spell, but more importantly it's also a mana rock, and it also does the job of being like the infinite damage outlet for your combo. So yeah, it's just like the perfect intersection between all of these effects. If you thought this was dumb, and you might, but like you might be underestimating the mana rock benefit of it. If you thought this was dumb and you wanted to play either Bolt or Rolling Thunder here, like I think that's totally fine. Or if you think that like once you've drawn your deck and done this Unwind combo and your opponent has no permanents left because you've Dinrovaed them, like, and you're not worried about timing out at all, in that situation, then maybe you don't even need like an infinite damage win con like that. I think that's maybe a defensible position as well, but yeah, I just really like having that effect in my deck somewhere. Of course, it doesn't matter online at all because like executing this combo online is just impossible because of how many clicks it takes. So if you're an online player, this is like not even effective for you really. But yeah, I'm playing this deck with the idea that I'm going to be using it in paper, so that is something that I expect will come up. So yeah, that's the last explanation for this last card, the one Meteorite. Then onto the sideboard now. So these blasts have been pretty stock. Usually you play quite a few of these. Versus the burn decks, it's really good to have more interaction, especially interaction that's easily castable from blue sources, because that's the mana that you have the easiest way to find. So Hydroblast, great for that. You're still a very slow deck, you can get run over very easily if you're not interacting. And I like to have another Weather the Storm in the sideboard for that as well, just the second copy, double up from the main deck, because sometimes you'll like play one for like only 6 or so, and then like later in the game you want to be able to teachings for another one. That's pretty good to be able to have that option. So Blue Blast and Weather the Storm, and then Red Blast just versus the like other control-y slow decks, where the fog effects are less good. Versus Gates, I probably wouldn't board all the fogs out. But like against Gates, like Weather the Storm is still bad. You probably don't want all the fogs. So more Pyros is good. And then especially versus like Tron Mirror or versus Familiars, like all the fogs are obviously really bad, and Pyros are great. So it just gives you a way to interact with the decks where your anti-combat plan is less relevant. Usually that's what Pyroblasts are for. Not every non-combat deck is weak to Pyroblast though, so like Cycle Storm or like weird things like that, or just like mid-rangey black decks or whatever, then usually versus mid-range you don't really need Moment's Peace to survive. You probably don't want to board them all out just to have the option to protect yourself, but you don't want to be sitting on fogs while your opponent is like drawing a ton of cards with their Deadly Dispute or whatever. So you can board Moment's Peace out, but I mean these cards aren't weak to Pyro or Hydroblast, so that's why you have to play stuff like Negate and Dispel. You could even play double Negate if you wanted, if you think the Dispel is not needed, but I just like having more efficient interaction available. Ancient Grudge, good versus Affinity, or you can board this in versus other generic mid-range stuff as well, because it takes out Graveyard Hate, like Relic of Progenitus and things like that, which would disrupt your Flicker combo. So yeah, usually Ancient Grudge is stock. New card in the sideboard that we haven't really played in the past is the Nature's Claims. So these are mostly in the list now because of the All That Glitters decks. They get on the board really fast, and you need a really efficient answer to stop them. So costing 1 mana versus 2 is really important, but when your mana base is built around stuff like Refractor and Crystal Grotto, so you don't want to be about to die to All That Glitters Ornithopter or whatever, and you can't cast your Disenchant because it costs 2 mana instead of 1. You obviously don't care at all about your opponent gaining 4 life in this deck, so yeah, this is just like Disenchant for 1 mana. Versus Glitters, it's pretty necessary, I think, and you also can bring it in versus Bogles and whatever other deck that's weak to Disenchant. I'm also playing 1 Inside Out in my sideboard. So in case you're not up to speed on this, this is basically a removal spell for creatures that have no power. And a lot of those creatures in the format that have no power are the ones that kill you without attacking, so your Moment's Peace and Tangle don't do anything. So specifically I'm talking about Axebane Guardian and Sunscape Familiar, but I mean it's also not bad in the mirror. You can like kill a Mnemonic Wall in response to an Ephemerate or something like that. So yeah, Inside Out is really nice. Both the fact that it costs blue and it also draws you a card means that it's better in this context than a card like Cast Down, which you could also play if you wanted to be able to just kill any creature. But it's just much harder to cast and it doesn't draw you a card. I would only play Cast Down if I was afraid of like Ulamog's Crusher or something, but I don't think that's a very popular card in the format at the moment. And you could also just play like 1 Lightning Bolt in your sideboard, and I think I have done that in the past, because it does kill the Axebane Guardian and the Sunscape Familiar, same as Inside Out, and you can also board it in versus like other aggro decks, or burn because it kills Thermo Alchemist in that, and it's good versus elves and blah blah blah. So Bolt could also be here. I think it might be useful to have the removal spell. In the past, in the sideboard for Tron, sometimes people have played cards for the grindy matchups, as people say, like they would play it like Ulamog's Crusher in their sideboard, or like a second Dinrova Horror or something. I think Pauper is just like a bit too fast for that now, and the Tron deck has gotten better at grinding anyway now that Lorien Revealed exists. So all these interaction cards are way more necessary than trying to position yourself to become like more grindy after sideboarding, or like more late game oriented. I don't think that's the way to go about it. One card that I wish I could fit in my sideboard, I probably will try and find space for that, but I don't know what I'm going to cut for it, is 1 Gorilla Shaman. I think the efficiency of the affinity decks, especially the more traditional ones, like the Grixis builds with Deadly Dispute and stuff, they can be a bit tricky to deal with. So just having the one of random Gorilla Shaman can really swing the game versus those. So I'd quite like to be able to find space for 1 Gorilla, but I don't know what I'm going to cut for it. But yeah, that's the overall where I'm at with this deck. I think it's been going pretty well for me so far, and unless I decide I want to switch to familiars for this upcoming tournament, I'm probably going to play a list that's very close to this. And when I do, I'll upload a video with like my phone camera recording of like the actual paper cards, because I think that just looks a bit cooler, seeing all the foils and stuff. So yeah, be on the lookout for that. That will be uploaded sometime in February. That's when that tournament is coming up. One thing that I don't think I've mentioned, and I said I was going to, is that some lists play second flicker. I think that's like fine, especially when you have extra good targets for it. You can like randomly get value in a lot more spots. Even though you aren't playing cards like Seagate Oracle, you have Meteorite, or it's not bad having another flicker. You know, you have this now too, is like slightly more marginal things you can flicker for value. Basically my reasoning for only playing 1 is that I feel the reason for playing as second flicker is that you can play a bit more fast and loose with the first one. You don't have to be so strict about like casting it in a spot where you make sure that it resolves and comes back to your hand, so your opponent can't Bojuka Bog it, or like maybe like something weird happens, like it gets duressed out of your hand and then it gets exiled or something. Like these types of situations don't happen that much in my experience, and like Flicker itself is like a clunky enough card to draw early in the game that I want to minimize that and not play 2 copies. But if you disagree, if you want to play another Flicker, I would cut a counter for it, because part of the reason why so many counters are good is because they can like protect your Flicker and clear the way for it to avoid that exact situation I was talking about, where like if they try and duress your Flicker, you can counter their duress, or if like you cast your Flicker and they try and counter it, you can counter their counter, things like that. So that's part of the reason why having so many counters is good, because it lets you set up the Flicker combo. Not necessarily even an infinite combo, just like casting Flicker for value. But if you have a second Flicker, you don't need to worry about like ensuring your Flicker is so protected from interaction, which means that you can kind of justify cutting a counter spell for another Flicker. But yeah, as I said, while I like understand the logic of that, I just haven't been experiencing my Flickers getting, or my Flicker singular being like denied or exiled with this configuration. So having less Flickers in the deck means that I brick less early, because Flicker's not a very useful card early in the game. So I'm not going to switch that unless I start finding that like people are really targeting Ghostly Flicker hard, or like I'm like really struggling to win through my opponent's like Nihil spell bombs or something. I've been pretty happy just with the 1 Flicker, but yeah, it's on my radar as like a change that you could make. But yeah, now that I've mentioned that, I think I've said everything that I want to say. So I'm going to wrap the video up now. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you liked this slightly new take on the Tron deck. At this point, the strategy is sort of like kind of solved, but just little tweaks here and there with some different cards can change your matchup percentage quite a lot, especially because this is a deck that draws so many cards. You can see a lot of cards over the course of the game, so even little tweaks, especially when you have tutors as well, can make a big difference in overall how the deck functions. So yeah, really fun deck to build and tune. I hope you like it. I hope you give it a try. Any questions, comments, make sure you let me know down below. This has been Li-Fi TCG with Pauper Tron, signing out.